There are loud ways to walk away from your family, and there are quiet ways. The loud way is a screaming match, a dramatic statement, a public denouncement. The quiet way is something much smaller and, honestly, much more devastating. The quiet way is simply deciding that you don't want to carry their name anymore. And that, reportedly, is what Gwendlyn Brown has done. She has stepped away from the Brown family name. No screaming, no spectacle, just a quiet, deliberate decision that the name she was born with is no longer a name she wants to wear. So tonight, I want to talk about what that actually means, because in a family this public, a child shedding the surname isn't a small administrative choice. It's one of the loudest, quiet statements a person can possibly make. Let me start with who Gwendlyn is, because she's one of the most fascinating members of the entire next generation. Gwendlyn is one of Christine's children, and over the past few years, she's become something the show never quite knew what to do with. She's outspoken, she's thoughtful, she built her own platform and her own voice, often offering sharp, honest commentary on the very family that made her famous. While some of the Brown kids retreated from the spotlight, Gwendlyn did something different. She turned the spotlight around and started narrating her own experience on her own terms. She became, in a sense, the family's most articulate insider critic. And now that insider has decided she doesn't want the family name attached to her at all. So let's talk about what a name actually means, because this is where the significance lives. A surname isn't just a word, it's an inheritance. It's the thing that says, I belong to these people, I come from this line, this is my tribe. We carry our family names through the world as a kind of badge of belonging. So when someone makes the deliberate choice to set that name down, they're not just changing some paperwork, they're making a statement about belonging itself. They're saying, on some level, I no longer want to be publicly identified as part of this. And when the name in question is one that's been broadcast on television for 16 years, attached to a very specific and increasingly controversial family, that statement gets amplified enormously. Now, I want to be careful and precise here, because we're talking about a real adult woman and her real choices, and the reporting is what we have to go on. The reporting indicates that Gwendlyn has stepped away from the Brown name. I'm going to treat that as the reported situation rather than overclaiming the specifics of how or to what exact extent. People distance themselves from family names in different ways, and for different reasons, and I don't want to put words in Gwendlyn's mouth about her precise motivations. What I can do is talk about what such a move signals in the context of everything we know about this family. And in that context, it signals a lot. Because here's the thing. Gwendlyn isn't a random person quietly changing her name for privacy. She's a public figure whose name is, in a sense, her connection to fame, to the show, to an audience that knows her precisely as Brown. To step away from that name is to step away from a built-in identity and a built-in platform. That's not a casual decision. That's someone deciding that whatever the name gives her in recognition, it costs her more in association. When someone is willing to give up the recognition value of a famous name, you have to ask what the name has come to represent to them that makes carrying it feel worse than losing the recognition. And the answer, almost certainly, has something to do with her father. Let me connect this to the larger pattern we've been tracking across this whole family, because Gwendlyn's choice is the symbolic capstone of it. We've talked about how the Brown children have, by and large, drifted from Kody. Some have spoken out, some have quietly built lives elsewhere, some have simply gone distant, but Gwendlyn dropping the name is the most symbolic version of that drift imaginable. The other kids distance themselves emotionally or physically. Gwendlyn is distancing herself nominally, at the level of identity itself. It's the difference between leaving a building and taking your name off the lease. She's not just stepping back from the family, she's declining to be labeled as part of it. And I think it's worth sitting with how much that has to sting for Kody, even if he never says a word about it. Because a father's name is, traditionally, one of the few things he passes down with certainty. It's supposed to be permanent, the one inheritance that can't be taken back. For a child to look at that inheritance and decide, no thank you, is a rejection that cuts at something very deep. It's not just, I'm angry at you, or we're not close. I don't want to be known as yours. That's about as fundamental as rejection gets. And the fact that Gwendlyn did it quietly, without fanfare, somehow makes it land even harder, because it reads not as a hot-tempered outburst, but as a cool, considered conclusion. Now, let me be fair and offer the other reading, because there always is one, and this channel deals in honesty. It's possible to interpret Gwendlyn's choice as being less about rejecting Kody specifically and more about claiming her own identity. Lots of people, as they come into their own, want a name that feels like theirs rather than one that ties them to a public spectacle they never chose. In this reading, dropping the Brown name isn't primarily an attack on her father. It's an act of self-definition, a way of saying, I am my own person, not a character in my family's show. That's a more generous and arguably healthier framing. And honestly, both things can be true at once. It can be about claiming herself and about distancing from a family identity that no longer fits. But here's why I don't think we can fully separate the two. Because the Brown name isn't neutral. It's not just any family name. It's a name that, thanks to the show, carries a very specific and increasingly heavy set of associations. Plural marriage, public dysfunction, a father the audience has largely turned on. So even if Gwendlyn's motivation is primarily self-definition, the name she's defining herself away from is specifically the one attached to Kody and the lifestyle. You can't shed the Brown name in 2026 without that act also being, inevitably, a statement about what the Brown name has come to mean. Self-definition and distancing from Kody aren't really separable here. They're the same gesture seen from two angles. Let me talk about Christine in all this, because Gwendlyn is her daughter, and I think Christine's influence is quietly present. Christine is the wife who left and modeled more than anyone so that you can walk away from the Brown family structure and build a better life. She showed her children that the family name and the family lifestyle were not destiny, that you could choose differently. So when Gwendlyn, Christine's daughter, takes the further step of stepping away from the name itself, it reads as the next logical move in a lineage of women in that household choosing their own paths. Christine left the marriage. Her daughter is, in a sense, leaving the label. The mother modeled the exit, and the daughter is completing it at the level of identity. There's a generational story here that I find genuinely significant, because a family name surviving into the next generation is one of the basic ways a family continues. Kids carry the name, pass it to their own kids, and the line goes on. When a prominent child of the family publicly steps away from the name, it raises the question of whether the Brown name, as a proud identity, even has a future. We've already talked about how none of the 18 kids appears to be carrying on the plural marriage lifestyle. Now we're seeing at least one of them decline to carry on the name. The lifestyle ends with this generation, and apparently, for some of them, so does the willingness to be branded by it. That's a family identity quietly dissolving in real time. I want to address the fans, because Gwendlyn has a real following, and the reactions to this will be intense. For the many fans who have grown to dislike Kody, Gwendlyn dropping the name feels like a vindication, like one of the kids finally saying out loud what the audience has felt for years. They love that she's, in their view, on the right side of this. For others, there might be a tinge of sadness, a sense that it's heartbreaking for a family to fracture so completely that a child doesn't even want the shared name. And I think both reactions are valid and can coexist. It can be empowering and sad. It can be a healthy act of self-definition and a marker of how badly this family has broken. Holding both is the honest response. What strikes me most, though, is the quietness of it. And I keep coming back to that. Gwendlyn didn't hold a press conference. She didn't, from what we can tell, make it into a dramatic spectacle. She just reportedly stepped away from the name. And there's something so much more powerful about that than any dramatic denouncement could be. A screaming rejection can be dismissed as a tantrum, a phase, a heat-of-the-moment thing. But a quiet, deliberate decision to no longer carry your father's name reads as settled, considered, final. It's not the language of someone lashing out. It's the language of someone who has thought it through and arrived, calmly, at a conclusion. And calm conclusions are much harder to argue with than angry ones. So when I step back and look at Gwendlyn stepping away from the Brown name, here's what I see. I see the most symbolic act of distancing the next generation has produced. I see a young woman claiming her own identity while simultaneously, and inevitably, making a statement about what her family name has come to represent. I see Christine's legacy of choosing a different path extending into her daughter's generation. And I see, quietly encoded in a simple choice about a name, the larger truth of this entire family. That the Brown identity, the thing that was supposed to bind them all together and carry forward, is dissolving from the inside. one quiet decision at a time. Gwendlyn didn't burn the family down. She just gently took her name off the door. And in a family this public, that whisper is louder than any shout. Let me dwell on the irony at the center of this because it's almost poetic. Gwendlyn's entire public profile, the audience she's built, the platform she has, all of it exists because of the Brown name. People found her because she was a Brown on a famous show about the Browns. The name opened every door she now walks through. And yet, she's reportedly choosing to step away from the very thing that made her known. Think about how much conviction that takes. Most people who gain fame through a family name guard that name jealously because it's their meal ticket. Gwendlyn appears willing to loosen her grip on the brand that built her, which tells you the personal cost of carrying it had finally outgrown the professional benefit of keeping it. When someone walks away from their own brand, the discomfort underneath has to be enormous. I think it helps to understand the specific role Gwendlyn has played, because it reframes this whole thing. In a family that spent years controlling its own narrative, Gwendlyn became something rare, the insider who told the audience the truth as she saw it. She translated the family for the fans. When viewers wanted to know what was really going on, what the edit was hiding, how the kids actually felt, Gwendlyn was often the one willing to say it plainly. She became a kind of bridge between the family's polished image and the messier reality underneath. So when that particular person, the truth teller, the translator, decides she doesn't even want the family name, it carries extra weight. It's the family's own honest narrator concluding that the brand isn't one she wants stamped on her. Names carry a psychological weight that I don't think we talk about enough. Your name is the first thing you're given and the last thing said about you. It's how the world files you, how it connects you to everyone who shares it. To carry a name is to carry, every single day, an association with the people and the story attached to it. So imagine carrying a name that, every time someone hears it, conjures a controversial reality show, a father the public criticizes, a lifestyle you may have complicated feelings about. For a private person, that's a burden you can mostly ignore. For a public one like Gwendlyn, it's inescapable. Every introduction, every credit, every headline reattaches her to the whole apparatus. Setting the name down might be the only way to stop carrying all of that everywhere she goes. And consider what this does to the siblings, because Gwendlyn's choice doesn't happen in isolation. She has many brothers and sisters, some of whom still carry the Brown name proudly, some of whom are ambivalent, some of whom have built families and identities around it. When one prominent sibling steps away from the name, it implicitly raises the question for all of them. It puts a choice on the table that maybe wasn't fully visible before. Not necessarily pressure, but possibility. Gwendlyn, by doing it, makes it thinkable. And in a family where the kids have shown a pattern of quietly following each other toward independence, rather than following their father, that visibility matters. She may have opened a door that others walk through later. There's a striking parallel here to what Christine is doing with her memoir, and I don't think it's a coincidence that mother and daughter are both, in their own ways, reclaiming their identities right now. Christine is writing her own story in her own words, taking back the narrative from the show that told it for her. Gwendlyn is stepping away from the name that tied her to that same narrative. Different methods, same instinct. The instinct to stop being defined by the Brown machine and start defining themselves. It's almost as if the women of Christine's branch of the family reached a collective decision, around the same time, that they were done letting the family brand speak for them. The memoir and the name change are two expressions of one impulse, the impulse towards self-ownership. I want to gently push back on anyone who'd call this petty or vindictive, because I don't think it is, and the framing matters. Stepping away from a name isn't an attack on anyone. It doesn't take anything from Kody. It doesn't hurt her siblings who keep the name. It's a purely self-directed act, a person deciding how she wants to be known in the world. There's actually something mature about handling it that way. Choosing the option that's about her own identity rather than about lashing out at someone else. If she'd wanted to attack Kody, there are louder ways. Instead, she chose the option that's fundamentally about her, not about him. That's not pettiness. That's a person quietly taking authorship of her own life. And maybe that's the deepest thing this whole story is really about, underneath the family drama. It's about authorship. Who gets to decide who you are? For 16 years, the Brown kids had that decided for them, by their parents' choices, by a television show, by a name that came with a whole pre-written story attached. Growing up, for any of us, is partly the process of taking that authorship back, of deciding for ourselves which parts of our inheritance we keep and which we set down. Gwendlyn setting down the name is just an unusually literal version of something every adult does in their own way. She's editing her own story. She's deciding the Brown name was a chapter, not the title. And there's something quietly powerful in watching a person who grew up with no control over her public identity finally, deliberately, take that control back. And here's a final thought that I think captures the whole significance of it. For most families, the name is the thing that outlasts everything else. Houses get sold, fortunes get spent, marriages end, but the name carries on through the generations as the one durable thread. The Brown family built an entire television empire on that name. And now, one of its most visible children is quietly demonstrating that even the name isn't guaranteed to survive. If the lifestyle ends with this generation, and the name itself starts getting set down too, then what exactly is left of the Brown legacy a generation from now? Maybe just a streaming archive and a cautionary tale? Gwendlyn's quiet choice forces that question. And it's a bigger one than any single episode of drama ever could be. So I'll turn it over to you, because I really want your reading on this. Do you think Gwendlyn stepping away from the Brown name is primarily about rejecting Kody, or primarily about claiming her own identity? Or, like me, do you think you can't really separate the two? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Do you think more of the Brown kids will eventually distance themselves from the name? Or is Gwendlyn an outlier? Tell me where you land, because I read every comment, and Gwendlyn always sparks the most thoughtful conversations in this audience. If you want me to do a full profile on Gwendlyn, her journey from quiet kid to the family's most articulate critic, let me know, and I'll build it next. And if you appreciate that we take these big symbolic moments seriously, instead of reducing them to clickbait, then do me a favor and subscribe, because thoughtfulness is the whole point here. And there is so much more of this family's story still to tell.